Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that's equal parts fascinating and mind-blowing. The story of Hans Wilsdorf, the mastermind behind one of the most iconic brands in the world, Rolex. I know what you're thinking, watches, right? Sure, we all know Rolex for its luxurious timepieces, but what you might not know is that Hans wasn't exactly born into a life of luxury and glamour. In fact, his journey to creating one of the world's most recognized luxury brands is full of surprises, struggles, and a little bit of sheer luck. Before we jump into the watchmaking genius and the legend of Rolex, hit that like button if you love hearing about legendary founders and their crazy entrepreneurial journeys. And don't forget to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories of iconic brands. Also, drop a comment below. Where are you tuning in from and what time is it right now? I love hearing from you night owls, wherever you are. All right, time to dim the lights and get comfy. Let's travel back to the early 20th century, before Rolex was even a thing. Chapter 1. Humble Beginnings. Hans Wilsdorf's early life. Born in Bavaria, Germany in 1881, Hans wasn't exactly handed a silver spoon. In fact, his early life was more like the anti-glamour story. His mother raised him alone after his father passed away when he was just a little kid, and life wasn't easy. But here's the thing about Hans, he was driven. He didn't want to just get by in life, he wanted to make a mark. Fast forward to his early adulthood, and Hans didn't immediately think about starting a luxury watch empire. In fact, he began his career in London working for a watchmaking firm. That's where he learned all the ins and outs of the watch industry. But here's the kicker. He realized something huge. The world of wristwatches was still young. Back then, people didn't wear wristwatches like they do now. Watches were mostly pocket-sized, and wristwatches were often seen as something for women or soldiers, not for the classy businessman. Hans saw an untapped market, and that was his big break. In 1905, at the age of 24, he founded a company with his brother-in-law called Wilsdorf and Davis, named after both of them. They didn't have a fancy brand name yet, but Hans knew this. If he wanted to sell wristwatches, they had to be reliable and elegant. At this point, wristwatches were often inaccurate, and let's be real, a watch that doesn't keep time isn't worth much. But here's where Hans made his first genius move. He partnered with a Swiss watchmaking company to create high-quality precision movements for his watches. And just like that, Wilsdorf and Davis began selling wristwatches. But the real game-changer was about to come. In 1908, Hans made the bold decision to rename the brand. And this is where Rolex was born. He wanted a name that was short, memorable, and elegant, and something that could easily be pronounced in any language. So he came up with Rolex, a name that's now synonymous with luxury, but at the time it was just an idea. Hans took a big leap by betting on the future of wristwatches. Even when most of the world wasn't quite convinced that a watch on your wrist was better than a pocket watch. But Hans wasn't just about making a nice-looking watch. He wanted perfection. He started pushing the boundaries of engineering. In 1926, Rolex released the Oyster, the world's first waterproof watch. Now, if that doesn't sound impressive, imagine wearing a watch that could survive underwater. This was a game-changer. Suddenly, Rolex wasn't just another watch. It was the watch for adventurers, the watch for explorers, and the watch for anyone who wanted something that would stand the test of time. Literally. But here's the wild part. Just a few years later, in 1927, a Rolex Oyster became even more famous when it was worn by Mercedes Gleitzer, a British swimmer who wore it during her swim across the English Channel. She emerged from the water, and the watch was perfectly intact. Not a scratch, not a drop of water inside. The Rolex Oyster was officially proven to be waterproof, and that moment turned the brand into a global sensation. From there, Rolex's reputation only grew. Hans Wilsdorf didn't just stop at making waterproof watches, he kept pushing the envelope. In the 1930s, Rolex introduced automatic movements, making the watches self-winding, meaning you wouldn't have to manually wind it up every day. Then came the Datejust in 1945, the first watch with an automatically changing date on the dial, something that now seems like a standard, but back then it was revolutionary. Rolex didn't just stop with new innovations. Hans knew that the luxury experience was just as important as the craftsmanship. So he set up stores around the world that catered to the elite, and Rolex watches became a symbol of status and refinement. You didn't just buy a Rolex, you invested in something that lasted a lifetime and passed down through generations. So as we look at Rolex today, it's not just a watch, it's a legacy. a legacy built by a determined visionary who started with nothing but a vision of luxury and precision. Hans Wilsdorf's dream of making the best watch in the world has turned into an iconic brand that still defines luxury almost a century later. Chapter 2. The Move to London and Early Watchmaking. Hans Wilsdorf was a man of ambition. By the time he was in his early 20s, he had already left the small town of Bavaria behind, chasing dreams that were bigger than his surroundings. But here's the thing. Hans didn't have inherited wealth or connections that would have made his journey easier. No, he was a young man with drive, an eye for precision, and a vision for luxury that few could even imagine. In the late 19th century, London was a booming, vibrant hub of trade and commerce. It was the perfect place for a young Hans Wilsdorf to start his journey in the world of watchmaking. But Hans wasn't just in London to work at some ordinary shop. He had a plan, and he was determined to make his mark in an industry that, at the time, didn't even recognize wristwatches as a luxury item. They were mostly seen as a practical tool for men on the go, maybe useful for soldiers or workers, but not something for the elite. Hans, however, saw potential. The wristwatch was still in its infancy. It wasn't the centerpiece of high society the way pocket watches were. Wristwatches were, at best, considered a fad, a convenient but not particularly fashionable accessory. They weren't known for elegance, and they certainly weren't considered a symbol of status. But Hans had always had a knack for seeing what others didn't, and he wasn't willing to settle for simply following trends. Hans began working at a Swiss watchmaking firm in London, and this is where he honed his skills, learning about the intricacies of mechanical movements, timekeeping precision, and the true art of making watches. At the time, watches were either pocket-sized, worn by the wealthy elite, or wristwatches that were used mainly by soldiers or those on the lower rungs of society. But Hans wasn't about to let that limit him. His goal was simple. He wanted to elevate the wristwatch, to create something that would rival even the most prestigious pocket watches on the market. Now, in case you're wondering, why wristwatches? Why not just focus on the more traditional pocket watches that were already synonymous with luxury? Well, here's the thing. Hans understood something that a lot of people missed. Wristwatches had the potential to become more than just a functional tool. They could be symbols of status, elegance, and prestige. It wasn't just about making a watch that told time. It was about creating something that could be worn on the wrist as a statement. At this point, pocket watches were the go-to for those with money. The elite of the day wore them as part of their outfit, a subtle yet undeniable marker of wealth and sophistication. The wristwatch, on the other hand, was relegated to practicality. It was something you wore while working or in the military. But Hans saw that the wristwatch could be more. It could be a luxury item, something that could be worn by the wealthy and stylish, not just as a tool, but as a statement of elegance and style. It wasn't long before Hans began toying with the idea of creating a new kind of wristwatch. He didn't want to make just any ordinary watch. He wanted to create something that would appeal to the elite, something that could compete with the best pocket watches and still be functional and precise. The challenge, though, was finding a way to make wristwatches elegant and reliable, two qualities that didn't often go hand in hand in the early days of wristwatch design. In 1905, at just 24 years old, Hans took a leap and partnered with his brother-in-law, Alfred Davis, to open a watchmaking company called Wilsdorf and Davis. They started off by importing Swiss-made movements, the heart of the watch, and assembling them in London. The duo initially focused on providing watches to the growing middle-class market, which was starting to embrace wristwatches as part of their everyday lives. But Hans wasn't satisfied with just selling any old watches. He wanted to elevate the wristwatch into something bigger than what the world had ever seen. Wilsdorf and Davis became one of the first companies to focus on making wristwatches with precise movements. But they were still struggling to distinguish themselves from the competition. It wasn't long before Hans realized that the name of the company, Wilsdorf and Davis, wasn't going to give them the level of prestige they needed. He needed a brand name that would become synonymous with precision, elegance, and luxury. In 1908, Hans decided to rebrand the company, changing its name to Rolex. But why Rolex? Well, Hans wanted a name that was easy to pronounce in any language, something short and memorable. He also wanted it to sound elegant and refined, something that would become associated with the highest quality in watchmaking. He believed that the right name would help set the brand apart and attract customers who were looking for more than just a functional timepiece. Now, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. At this stage, Rolex wasn't the global icon it is today. It was still just a dream. Hans knew that creating a luxury brand was about more than just the name. It was about the quality and innovation behind the products. He didn't want to simply follow in the footsteps of existing watchmakers. He wanted to create something groundbreaking. And to do that, he would need to think bigger than anyone else. Hans had the vision, the ambition, and most importantly, the drive to make Rolex more than just a watch brand. But the real game changer was on the horizon. Chapter 3. Founding Wilsdorf and Davis, 1905. All right, now we've gotten to the point in our story where Hans Wilsdorf's vision is really starting to take shape. Up until now, he's learned the craft, worked for others, and developed the kind of drive that would push him to change the entire world of watchmaking. But it wasn't until 1905 that Hans Wilsdorf truly set the wheels in motion for something revolutionary. At the age of just 24, Hans made the bold decision to partner up with Alfred Davis, a friend from his time working in the watch industry, to start his own company in London, Wilsdorf and Davis. The partnership marked the beginning of what would eventually become Rolex. But this wasn't some overnight success story. No, like most great entrepreneurs, Hans faced numerous challenges along the way. It wasn't as if the world was waiting for a new watch brand. He had to carve out a niche in an already established industry. So what exactly did Hans want to do with Wilsdorf and Davis? Well, he wasn't satisfied with just making ordinary watches. He wasn't interested in creating just any old timepiece that told the time. Hans's goal was to make watches that were unparalleled in precision, elegance, and most importantly, reliability. At the time, wristwatches were still mostly seen as practical tools for soldiers or workers, not the luxury items we know today. The luxury watch market was dominated by pocket watches, and wristwatches were often bulky and inaccurate. Hans, though, saw an opportunity to change that. And change it he would. So he and Alfred set out to create high-quality, precise wristwatches that would be affordable to the growing middle class while still being premium enough to compete with the more established pocket watch brands. But here's the thing, to make a true impact, precision alone wasn't going to be enough. Hans needed his watches to stand out from the competition, and that meant brand recognition, which was where the magic would really begin. From the outset, Wilsdorf and Davis focused on importing Swiss-made movements, the heart of any timepiece, from Switzerland. They would then assemble them in London, making them accessible to the growing British market. But here's where Hans really started thinking big. While Swiss-made movements were already known for their precision and quality, the brand name attached to the watch was just as important. Hans realized that the watch's name could become just as iconic as the movement itself. So while Wilsdorf and Davis was the company's official name, Hans began the process of rebranding to something simpler, something memorable. And that's when the idea for Rolex came into play. You might be wondering, why the name Rolex? Well, Hans wanted something short, easy to pronounce, and timeless. He thought about how the name would sound in different languages and cultures. It needed to be simple, yet sophisticated, something that would be easily recognized across the globe. So he came up with Rolex, a name that would eventually become synonymous with luxury, precision, and style. But getting the name out there wasn't as easy as it sounds. In the early days, Wilsdorf and Davis had to contend with a market that wasn't exactly hungry for wristwatches. While wristwatches were gaining traction among certain groups, they were still a niche product compared to pocket watches. The challenge was clear. How could Rolex stand out in a crowded market, especially when consumers had a long history of favoring pocket watches? The answer was simple: innovation. Hans knew that to convince people to trade in their pocket watches for a wristwatch, the watch had to be not only functional but also beautiful and durable. So, from the very beginning, Wilsdorf and Davis began focusing on creating elegant yet functional wristwatches, ones that could withstand the rigors of everyday life while also serving as status symbols for the growing middle class. And it worked. Slowly but surely, the brand started to build a reputation. But Hans wasn't done yet. He wasn't satisfied with just making functional timepieces. No, Hans had his sights set on something bigger, something that would truly revolutionize the watchmaking world. So he kept pushing, innovating, and building the foundation for what would eventually become the Rolex brand. Chapter 4: The Birth of the Rolex Brand, 1908. All right, now that Wilsdorf and Davis was up and running, Hans Wilsdorf had a clear vision in mind. He wanted Rolex to be a brand that wasn't just known for its precision and craftsmanship, but for something even bigger, something that would leave a legacy in the watchmaking world. And so in 1908, Hans made one of the most important decisions in Rolex's history. He officially rebranded the company from Wilsdorf and Davis to Rolex. You might be wondering, why the rebrand? Why change the name at all? Well, the truth is Wilsdorf and Davis was fine as a name, but it wasn't exactly something that would capture the attention of consumers globally. Rolex, on the other hand, was short, easily pronounceable, and most importantly, memorable. Hans knew that for his watches to become a global symbol of luxury, the name needed to sound elegant, simple, and recognizable, and that's exactly what he got with Rolex. But it wasn't just the name that was important, it was how Rolex was marketed. Hans knew that the world of watches wasn't just about functionality. Sure, watches needed to keep accurate time and be reliable, but Rolex had to become more than just a timekeeper. It had to be a statement piece. It had to stand for something that people aspired to, a symbol of success and achievement, and Hans was ready to make it happen. So what did Hans do next? He got to work on creating a brand identity that would elevate Rolex above the competition. One of the first major moves was Rolex's focus on craftsmanship. Hans didn't just want Rolex to be known for precision, he wanted it to be known for quality and luxury. Each Rolex watch wasn't just built to be accurate, it was designed to be a work of art. Every part of the watch, from the movement to the case, had to be perfect. This obsession with perfection became the foundation of the brand. But Hans also knew that Rolex couldn't just be about making watches. It had to be about creating an experience. From the very beginning, Hans wanted Rolex watches to be worn by those who achieved great things, those who were on the cutting edge of their industries, and those who wanted to be part of something exclusive. The idea was clear. Rolex was about more than just time. It was about making time for people who understood what it meant to be part of something rare and special. Rolex's early marketing strategies were simple but effective. They didn't just sell watches, they sold a lifestyle. To this day, Rolex's marketing has always been about association with greatness. Whether it's explorers summiting mountains or athletes winning championships, Rolex has always been about more than just telling time. It's about making a statement and achieving greatness. But let's take a look at one of the most iconic moves that helped propel Rolex into the global spotlight, the introduction of the Rolex logo. The crown symbol has since become one of the most recognizable logos in the world, and it wasn't just a random design. The crown symbolized the idea of royalty, power, and prestige. It's no coincidence that Rolex watches have long been associated with the elite, the rich, the powerful, the adventurous. The crown was a simple yet brilliant way to communicate the brand's association with exclusivity and luxury. Of course, creating a luxury brand isn't just about the name or the logo, it's about delivering a product that can back up those promises, and that's exactly what Rolex did. Hans Wilsdorf knew that Rolex had to be perfectly reliable in terms of timekeeping, but he also wanted the watches to be durable enough to handle the real world. That's why Rolex was among the first to introduce the waterproof case, the famous Oyster case, which was introduced in 1926. This innovation didn't just make Rolex watches functional, it made them practical for people who lived life on the edge. Whether you were a diver, an explorer, or simply someone who didn't want to worry about their watch getting damaged, the Oyster case made Rolex a leader in durability as well as luxury. But even with these amazing innovations, Rolex still had to establish itself as a luxury brand. And to do that, Hans had to continue creating watches that would appeal to the elite. From the Datejust to the Submariner, Rolex watches became a staple for those who had made it in life. They weren't just about telling time, they were about making a statement about who you were and what you represented. So here's the big question. What do you think was the key factor in Rolex's success during its early years? Was it the innovation in design, the focus on luxury, or the ability to associate the brand with greatness through its marketing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And as always, where are you tuning in from and what time is it? I'd love to hear your ideas. Chapter 5. Innovation begins. The Oyster, 1926. All right, we've already seen how Rolex was taking bold steps to carve out its place as a luxury brand, but now it was time to revolutionize the entire industry. You see, Hans Wilsdorf wasn't just about making nice-looking watches. He wanted Rolex to stand for something more, something that no other brand had done before. And in 1926, Hans achieved that with the introduction of the Rolex Oyster, the world's first waterproof wristwatch. Let's pause for a second and think about that. A waterproof watch in 1926. To put it into perspective, wristwatches at the time were still considered delicate instruments that needed to be handled with care. If you got caught in the rain, dropped your watch in a puddle, or even splashed a little water on it, you were pretty much done for. Watches weren't made to handle the rigors of everyday life, let alone something as extreme as water or dust. But Hans Wilsdorf saw an opportunity to do what no one else had dared, build a watch that could withstand it all. The key to the Rolex Oyster was its innovative case. The case itself was hermetically sealed, meaning that water and dust couldn't get inside to damage the delicate movement. This was achieved through an ingenious design that made the case airtight. No other wristwatch had anything like it at the time. It wasn't just about slapping a seal on the watch. This was an intricate, highly engineered process that required precision and craftsmanship. The result was a timepiece that could be worn in the rain while diving or even in a sandstorm without worrying about damaging the internal mechanisms. Now, Hans didn't stop there. As with any great invention, Rolex needed a test to prove just how revolutionary the Oyster really was. Enter Mercedes Gleitzer, a British swimmer who would soon make history by attempting to swim across the English Channel. Mercedes had set her sights on becoming the first woman to successfully swim the Channel, a feat that had never been accomplished before. Hans saw an opportunity to prove the Oyster's durability under extreme conditions, so he sent one of his Oyster watches with her on the swim. It was a bold move, and it paid off. After 10 hours of grueling swimming through icy waters, Mercedes emerged on the other side of the Channel, and her Rolex Oyster was still ticking perfectly. This was the moment that forever cemented the Rolex Oyster as the gold standard for durability in the watch world. Not only was it waterproof, but it was also able to withstand extreme conditions that no other wristwatch could handle. Suddenly, Rolex wasn't just known for its precision, it was known for being a tough, reliable companion in real-world conditions. The media frenzy surrounding the successful swim helped Rolex's reputation skyrocket. Newspapers across the world picked up the story, and soon Rolex watches were being seen not just as luxury items for the rich and famous, but as reliable, adventurous tools for those who lived life to the fullest. From explorers to athletes, anyone who was pushing the limits and wanted a watch they could depend on started flocking to Rolex. But here's the thing. The Oyster case wasn't just about being waterproof. It was about functionality meeting luxury. Rolex knew that in order to remain relevant in the luxury market, it had to continue pushing boundaries in design and innovation. The Oyster was just the first step. This was the moment when Rolex realized that the world of luxury watches didn't have to be about just pretty faces and precious metals. It could be about practical luxury, watches that were beautiful, but also tough enough for everyday life. And let's not forget the marketing genius behind it all. The Rolex Oyster wasn't just sold as a timepiece, it was sold as proof of what Rolex stood for. Every ad campaign, every storefront display, every piece of promotional material emphasized how Rolex was for those who didn't just want a watch. They wanted a companion. A companion that could handle the elements, keep up with their adventures, and still look elegant while doing it. Rolex's focus on innovation didn't stop with the Oyster case. Over the years, the company continued to evolve and make improvements to its designs, refining its movements, creating better materials, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible in a wristwatch. But it all started with the Oyster, which set the stage for Rolex's legacy as the brand for those who wanted the best of both worlds, luxury and reliability. Now here's the question for you. Do you think the Rolex Oyster would have had the same impact if it hadn't been for Mercedes Gleitzer's swim? How important do you think that moment was in shaping Rolex's legacy as the world's ultimate luxury watch? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, where are you tuning in from and what time is it? I can't wait to hear what you think. Chapter 6. The Famous Channel. Swim, Mercedes Gleitzer, 1927. Now that we've seen how Rolex was making waves in the watch industry with the Oyster case, it was time for the brand to really prove its claims of durability. Mercedes Gleitzer, a British swimmer, would become the person who would help solidify Rolex's legacy in a way no advertising campaign ever could. In 1927, Mercedes set out on a historic swim across the English Channel, the stretch of water that separates England and France, and she would take a Rolex Oyster with her. Why is this so important? Let's break it down. First off, the English Channel swim was, and still is, one of the most grueling feats a swimmer can attempt. The cold temperatures, rough waters, and unpredictable currents made it an extremely difficult challenge, even for the most seasoned athletes. Back then, it was seen as the ultimate test of a swimmer's stamina, and very few people had succeeded in crossing it. Mercedes Gleitzer, however, was determined. She had already achieved some notable swimming feats, and now she was attempting the Channel swim in hopes of becoming the first woman to complete the journey. This was no easy task. She was swimming in frigid waters that averaged around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 13 degrees Celsius, facing waves and winds that would leave even the most experienced swimmers exhausted. But Mercedes wasn't going to do this alone. As a promotional stunt, Hans Wilsdorf of Rolex saw an opportunity to test the Oyster's durability under extreme conditions. At that time, Rolex had already established the Oyster case as the world's first waterproof watch, and Hans was eager to prove it. So he sent one of his Rolex Oyster watches with Mercedes during her swim. It was a gamble. Not only was the swim extremely challenging, but the watch was going to be exposed to some of the most extreme conditions imaginable. But Hans was confident. He believed the Oyster was built for this. The swim didn't go as smoothly as planned. Mercedes was forced to stop during the swim after about 15 hours due to extreme exhaustion and the freezing conditions. However, while she didn't complete the swim on that attempt, the Rolex Oyster was still ticking perfectly when she finished. It had proven its durability and waterproof capabilities to the world. This event was covered widely in the press, with many newspapers and publications reporting that the Rolex Oyster was the first watch to survive the harshest of environments without fail. The watch had withstood saltwater, cold temperatures, and the continuous swimming motion of over 10 hours in the English Channel, all without a scratch and, most importantly, without losing its accuracy. The media coverage surrounding the event turned the Rolex Oyster into a symbol of reliability and strength. Suddenly, Rolex watches weren't just seen as luxury items. They were seen as functional, durable, and built for those who took on life's toughest challenges. In fact, Mercedes' Channel swim helped Rolex become the watch of choice for explorers, athletes, and adventurers who needed a timepiece they could trust in extreme conditions. This moment was pivotal. The Oyster case and its association with Mercedes Gleitzer's swim marked the beginning of Rolex's transition from a luxury watch brand to a global symbol of resilience and precision. It wasn't just about luxury anymore. It was about proving that Rolex could handle whatever life threw at it. Whether you were a diver, an explorer, or simply someone looking for a watch that could withstand daily wear, the Oyster became the standard. By the time Mercedes Gleitzer made her second successful swim across the English Channel a year later, in 1928, the Rolex Oyster had already gained a reputation for being unbeatable. The story of her first attempt and the surviving Oyster watch was featured in newspapers around the world. For Rolex, this was an unbeatable piece of marketing. It didn't rely on flashy ads or slogans. Instead, it let the watch's performance do the talking. The Oyster's success with the Channel swim also made Rolex the go-to brand for the elite, those who valued not only luxury but functionality. The idea that a luxury watch could also be durable and reliable was a new concept. This shift marked a key point in Rolex's evolution into a global symbol of status, craftsmanship, and resilience. Here's the big question for you. Do you think the Rolex Oyster would have reached the same level of fame and recognition if it hadn't been for Mercedes Gleitzer's Channel swim? How important do you think real-world testing is for a brand's reputation, especially for something like a luxury watch? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Also, where are you tuning in from and what time is it? Let's talk about it. Chapter 7. Pioneering Automatic Movements, 1930s. By the 1930s, Rolex had already established itself as a top-tier luxury watch brand, and Hans Wilsdorf was constantly looking for ways to stay ahead of the competition. Wristwatches were becoming more popular, but many of them were still manual, meaning the wearer had to wind them regularly. While this wasn't necessarily a bad thing, It posed a major inconvenience, especially for those who wanted a timepiece that could easily keep up with the demands of modern life. That's where Hans Wilsdorf's visionary mindset came into play. He wasn't just interested in making luxury timepieces, he wanted to redefine the watchmaking industry. So Rolex became one of the first brands to focus on creating automatic movements which were designed to wind themselves simply through the movement of the wearer's wrist. In 1931, Rolex introduced the perpetual movement, a groundbreaking feature that would go on to become a game-changer in the watch industry. Unlike traditional manual watches that required the wearer to wind the crown every day, the perpetual movement used a rotating weight that moved with the wearer's arm, transferring that motion into winding the watch's movement. Essentially, the more you moved, the more your watch kept itself running. This innovation was a revolutionary concept at the time, and it quickly became a major selling point for Rolex. The idea was simple but profound. A watch that you didn't need to wind every day, one that was powered by you, and it was brilliant. By introducing automatic winding, Rolex was able to offer its clients a luxury timepiece that didn't just look beautiful but also served a very practical purpose. With the perpetual movement, Rolex ensured that their watches could stay accurate and reliable without requiring the wearer to remember to wind them up. This was a huge step toward making Rolex a true symbol of modernity, where functionality and luxury went hand in hand. But it wasn't just about convenience, it was about taking watchmaking to the next level, something that would allow Rolex to keep pace with the rapidly evolving world around it. But here's where it gets even more interesting. While automatic watches weren't entirely new at the time, Rolex was the first brand to really master the technology and make it something standard in their watches. They didn't just take the existing designs and tweak them. They perfected them. Rolex ensured that the perpetual movement wasn't just functional, but also extremely precise, something that was essential for the luxury market. The release of the automatic Rolex movement marked a turning point. No longer were Rolex watches just about telling time, they were about making a statement about how you lived your life. You didn't just want a watch that showed you the hours, you wanted one that could keep up with your dynamic lifestyle. Whether you were an athlete, a traveler, or someone who simply wanted a watch that didn't need constant care, Rolex's automatic movements made it a perfect companion for those on the go. The perpetual movement also set Rolex apart from many of its competitors who were still relying on manual winding mechanisms. Rolex had now positioned itself as not only a symbol of luxury, but also a pioneer in watch technology. It was the perfect blend of craftsmanship and practicality, an innovation that would soon become standard in the watch industry, not just for Rolex, but for the entire market. As the 1930s progressed, Rolex would continue to push the envelope, incorporating automatic movements into their other iconic models like the Rolex Datejust, which would feature the world's first automatic date-changing function. But for now, the introduction of the perpetual movement alone had already established Rolex as a revolutionary force in the world of horology. Let me throw a question your way. Do you think the shift to automatic movements was the key factor that made Rolex stand out in the watch industry, or was there another innovation that helped Rolex solidify its place at the top? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Also, where are you tuning in from and what time is it? Chapter 8, The Date, Just and Revolutionary Features, 1945. By the time 1945 came around, Rolex had already established itself as a leader in both luxury and reliability, with innovations like the oyster case and the perpetual movement. But Hans Wilsdorf wasn't the kind of person to sit back and rest on his laurels. For him, it was never just about making precise or beautiful watches. It was about pushing the limits of what was possible and creating watches that were both innovative and functional. In 1945, Rolex introduced the Datejust, which would go on to become one of the most iconic models in the brand's history. The Datejust wasn't just a watch with a date function, it was the first wristwatch to feature an automatically changing date, a feature that we take for granted today, but back then it was an absolute game-changer. Before the Datejust, date displays on watches existed, but they were either manually adjusted or simply added to the design without any automatic mechanism. For most people, setting the date on their watch every month could be a hassle, especially when the 30-day month cycle didn't line up with the standard 31-day month. Hans Wilsdorf, always thinking ahead, wanted to create a wristwatch that didn't just keep time, but also kept track of time in a way that was both practical and elegant. The Rolex Datejust was the first watch to feature an automatically changing date on the dial. How did it work? Well, it was powered by the perpetual movement that had already become famous for its self-winding mechanism. This innovation meant that the Datejust's date function would automatically change at midnight with the simple turn of the gears inside the movement without the wearer needing to do anything. The automatic date feature made the Datejust incredibly convenient, perfect for those who wanted to keep track of time without having to fiddle with settings constantly. But it wasn't just the date function that made the Datejust revolutionary. The design was just as groundbreaking. The Datejust's case was sleek yet robust, maintaining the elegant proportions Rolex was known for while adding a functional date window at the 3 o'clock mark. It was simple yet refined, a watch that could easily transition from a business meeting to a casual dinner. The classic design of the Datejust helped it become universal. It was timeless, and its understated elegance ensured it would appeal to both men and women. But Hans didn't stop there. He wanted the Datejust to be more than just a pretty face. This was a watch that had to be reliable and durable, just like every other Rolex. So the Datejust was designed with the same level of precision and quality that had become synonymous with Rolex, ensuring it could withstand everyday wear without losing its charm or function. With the Datejust, Rolex had once again proven that it could combine luxury with practicality, a key element that would set it apart from every other watchmaker in the world. The Datejust's introduction wasn't just a technical achievement, it was a cultural moment. This was the first time that luxury and everyday convenience had come together in such a seamless way. The Datejust quickly became the watch of choice for anyone who appreciated quality, elegance, and the ability to track time with minimal effort. Whether worn by a businessman, an adventurer, or a celebrity, the Datejust represented modern sophistication in a way that no other watch could. But the Datejust didn't just stand out because of its features or design, it became synonymous with success. It wasn't just about wearing a luxury item, it was about wearing a symbol of accomplishment. The Datejust became a watch worn by leaders, celebrities, and those who wanted to express their personal achievements without saying a word. Over the years, the Datejust has been worn by everyone, from Winston Churchill to Lady Diana, from Roger Federer to James Bond. People who didn't just wear watches, but who made them part of their legacy. Rolex's decision to introduce the Datejust also marked a significant point in the evolution of the wristwatch. It wasn't just a luxury accessory anymore. It had become a tool that could help people stay on top of their busy lives. With its elegant design and automatic date-changing function, the Datejust was a clear example of Rolex's ability to blend tradition with innovation, something that would continue to define the brand's philosophy moving forward. Here's a question for you. How important do you think the Datejust's automatic date feature was in shaping Rolex's legacy as a luxury watch brand? Do you think the Datejust's ability to combine practicality with luxury helped set Rolex apart from its competitors? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let me know if you think today's luxury watches still offer that perfect balance of functionality and elegance. And, as always, where are you tuning in from and what time is it? Chapter 9. Expansion and establishing Rolex's iconic status. By the time Rolex launched the Datejust in 1945, the brand was already becoming a household name. But Hans Wilsdorf had bigger ambitions. Rolex wasn't just going to be a prestigious watch brand, it was going to be the symbol of achievement, worn by those who truly conquered the world. Wilsdorf had already proven that a luxury watch could combine precision, reliability, and innovation, but now it was time for Rolex to stake its claim as a global leader in the watchmaking world. The mid-20th century was a time of great change, and Rolex was perfectly positioned to ride the wave of that change. After establishing itself as the ultimate luxury brand in the United States and Europe, Rolex began making moves to expand its reach even further. Hans Wilsdorf knew that in order for Rolex to continue growing, it needed to gain a stronghold in new markets across the globe. But the question was, How would Rolex stand out in a world where watchmakers from all over Europe and America were trying to establish themselves in the luxury market? The answer was simple: reputation. Rolex wasn't just about making beautiful watches, it was about creating a legacy. A brand that wasn't just for the wealthy elite, but for those who truly wanted to wear something that represented excellence. In the 1950s, Rolex began opening stores in key international cities, starting with Geneva, Paris, and New York, places where luxury was both desired and appreciated. These locations were key to cementing Rolex as a global brand. People weren't just buying watches, they were buying into the Rolex way of life, an exclusive, luxurious, and adventurous lifestyle. The idea wasn't just to sell watches, it was to sell a vision of what it meant to be part of the Rolex world. Rolex's reputation also expanded in part due to its association with explorers and athletes. The brand's watches were worn by those who needed reliable tools for extreme environments, from the depths of the ocean to the heights of the Himalayas. The Rolex Submariner, for example, became the watch of choice for divers and adventurers, thanks to its incredible water resistance and precision. The Rolex Explorer, on the other hand, became synonymous with mountain climbing, famously worn by Sir Edmund Hillary during his historic ascent of Mount Everest in 1953. This association with exploration and adventure helped make Rolex not just a luxury item, but a tool for greatness. It wasn't just adventurers, though. Rolex watches were quickly becoming the timepiece of choice for celebrities, politicians, and business moguls alike. The brand's association with success and prestige grew even more in the 1960s when famous figures such as James Bond, played by Sean Connery, wore a Rolex Submariner in the classic film Dr. No. This was the moment when Rolex truly entered the world of pop culture, forever linking the brand with action, luxury, and elegance. Bond didn't just wear a watch, he wore a Rolex, making it a symbol of the elite. By the time the 1970s rolled around, Rolex wasn't just a luxury brand, it was the luxury brand. The Rolex crown was now a symbol recognized around the world as a mark of uncompromising quality and prestige. It wasn't just about owning a watch anymore, it was about being part of a legacy that had been carefully cultivated by Hans Wilsdorf since the company's inception. The Rolex watches weren't just selling themselves based on design and craftsmanship, they were symbols of status, coveted by anyone who wanted to exude confidence and success. The introduction of the Daytona in the early 1960s further solidified Rolex's commitment to high performance and exclusive design. The Daytona was created for motorsports enthusiasts and quickly became known for its precision and style. It wasn't just a watch. It was an integral part of the motorsport world, and over time it became a staple in the luxury watch market. By the time Rolex was celebrating its 50th anniversary in 1955, the company had fully solidified its position as a global leader in the watchmaking world. Rolex watches were now a symbol of success, coveted by those who wanted a timepiece that embodied refinement and adventure at the same time. The brand had truly transformed the world's perception of watches. What was once a tool for telling time was now the ultimate luxury item, synonymous with prestige and achievement. Here's a thought to leave with you. Do you think Rolex's strong association with success and prestige helped propel it into the iconic status it holds today, or was it their constant innovation and commitment to quality that made the brand stand out among competitors? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, where are you tuning in from and what time is it? We'd love to hear your perspective. Chapter 10. The Legacy of Hans Wilsdorf and Rolex. Today, as we reach the final chapter of this journey, it's hard to overstate just how much Rolex has shaped not only the world of watches, but also the very definition of luxury itself. Hans Wilsdorf had an ambitious vision when he first founded Rolex, and over the past century the brand has not only survived the challenges of the market, but has thrived, remaining the gold standard in horology. What Wilsdorf built wasn't just a watch company, it was a legacy that has been carefully maintained, evolved, and enhanced by Rolex's leadership over the decades. When Hans Wilsdorf passed away in 1960, he left behind more than just a thriving company. He left behind a brand that had already become synonymous with luxury, precision, and elegance. Rolex was now more than a timepiece. It was a symbol of success, achievement, and perfection. But the real question is, how did Rolex manage to maintain that legacy while adapting to the changing world around it? The answer lies in the brand's ability to remain true to its core values of craftsmanship, innovation, and prestige. Even as the watch industry evolved with the advent of smartwatches and digital technology, Rolex remained steadfast in its commitment to producing mechanical masterpieces. It's not about joining the latest trend for Rolex, it's about staying true to the timeless art of watchmaking. Each Rolex watch is still crafted using techniques that have been honed over decades, ensuring that the precision and quality of each piece is unparalleled. Today, Rolex watches are still made with the same level of attention to detail that Hans Wilsdorf insisted upon. The brand uses only the finest materials like 904L stainless steel, 18K gold, and platinum, ensuring that every Rolex watch is built to last a lifetime and beyond. The movement inside each watch is crafted to perfection, with the perpetual movement still at the core of many Rolex models, continuing to provide the reliability and precision that Rolex is known for. Rolex's commitment to innovation hasn't stopped either. In recent years, the brand has introduced a number of technological advancements, including the Cerachrom bezel on the Submariner and Daytona, which is made from a ceramic composite that is virtually scratch-proof and resistant to fading. Another recent addition is the roll saw, a combination of steel and gold, which is a distinctive mark of craftsmanship and luxury. These innovations, while modern, still embody the same quality and precision that Rolex was built on. One of the most important aspects of Rolex's success today is its exclusivity. Rolex is known for producing a limited number of watches each year, ensuring that the brand remains rare and highly coveted. Rolex watches are rarely discounted and are not easily found in outlets, which only adds to their allure and status. The demand for Rolex watches often exceeds supply, making them a sought-after item that represents a luxury lifestyle, and exclusivity is a key part of what makes Rolex so desirable. In addition to exclusivity, Rolex continues to be a prominent player in the world of sports sponsorship and philanthropy, particularly in the fields of yachting, golf, and tennis. Rolex sponsors some of the world's most prestigious events, like Wimbledon, the Masters, and the Rolex Sydney Hobart Yacht Race, reinforcing its association with success and prestige. The brand is also committed to supporting charitable causes, particularly in the areas of culture and education, through the Rolex Mentor and Protégé Arts Initiative and other philanthropic efforts. As of today, Rolex remains one of the most coveted luxury brands in the world. Whether it's the iconic Submariner, the elegant Datejust, or the sporty Daytona, Rolex watches continue to be symbols of achievement, reliability, and timeless design. The brand has evolved with the times, but its commitment to quality, precision, and luxury has never wavered. So what makes Rolex still so relevant today? It's the same reason it was relevant when Hans Wilsdorf founded the company over 100 years ago: quality craftsmanship, innovative design, and uncompromising standards. Whether you're looking at a classic Rolex or a modern release, the brand's legacy continues to shine brightly, showing us that great design never goes out of style. Here's a question for you. Do you think Rolex's commitment to exclusivity and timeless craftsmanship is the key to its success? Or has modern innovation like the Cerachrom bezel played a bigger role in keeping the brand relevant today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from and what time it is. And there you have it. Rolex's incredible journey from humble beginnings to becoming the gold standard in luxury timepieces. From Hans Wilsdorf's original vision to the brand's groundbreaking innovations like the Oyster Case, Perpetual Movement, and Datejust, Rolex has redefined what it means to wear a luxury watch. What makes Rolex so special is its unwavering commitment to craftsmanship and precision. Every step of the way, from its inception to the current day, Rolex has not only met the demands of time, but exceeded them. The brand isn't just about telling the time, it's about making a statement, representing achievement, and symbolizing the pinnacle of luxury and reliability. Hans Wilsdorf wanted to build a company that wasn't just about selling watches, but about creating lasting legacies, and Rolex has done just that, becoming a symbol of success and exclusivity that transcends generations. Whether it's an iconic model like the Submariner, the Daytona, or the Datejust, each Rolex watch is a mark of timeless design and perfection. As Rolex moves forward, the brand's commitment to innovation and quality ensures it will continue to stand the test of time. What started with a vision in the early 1900s is now an enduring legacy that sets the bar for watchmaking worldwide. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more amazing stories.